The Chair understands that Amendment Number 4 will not be offered. That's correct. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5, printed in Part B of House Report 112-200. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Yes, I have an amendment, number 5, at the desk.
And the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 392, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes, and the Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Madam Chair, many have expressed deep concern about the security situation in the Middle East. There are many hopeful signs from the so-called Arab Spring, but there are also concerns about the security of Israel and neighboring states. Several among us and among my constituents expressed concern some months ago about what would happen with a weakened border between Egypt and Israel. And as we all know, on August 18th, several groups of terrorists killed 8 Israelis, wounded several more in attacks along the road leading to Eilat. This is just one example of what we need to pay attention to in the area. Will Egypt become a staging ground for more terrorist attacks against Israel? Can al-Qaeda gain new safe haven in any of the countries undergoing massive political change? We hope not. I would like to think not. But it is important that we have good, solid intelligence assessment of the situation. My amendment would direct the Director of National Intelligence to submit to Congress within half a year of passage of this law an estimate on the implications of these revolutions for the security of the State of Israel, and to report to Congress in a way that is accessible to all members of Congress on the implications of the so-called Arab Spring and the changes in the countries around the area. This amendment is for obvious reasons. Israel is an important ally and really is founded on principles of law and fairness and justice, and we want to see those values upheld and extended. I recognize in conversations with the Chairman, Chairman Rogers, and the Ranking Member that an amendment to this legislation is perhaps not the best way to accomplish this. So in a moment I will ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment, giving notice to the Chair, but with the understanding that we will make this same request of the Director of National Intelligence by way of a letter, and that we will have available to members of Congress this estimate of the security situation. I thank the Chairman and the Ranking Member very much for their cooperation on this. They are fully aware of this, which is partly why it is not necessary to offer an amendment to that effect. I'd be pleased to yield to the Chair, or perhaps the Chair would like to claim time on his own.
I would take the yield, if I may.
Gentleman from Michigan.
I appreciate the gentleman working with us. It is an important issue, and you have our commitment from myself and I believe the Ranking Member to coordinate this particular report, and it allows them, and I appreciate the gentleman's consideration, because it will allow the community to prioritize it. It may take 3 weeks or longer, or 3 weeks shorter than an amendment might call for, but it allows them to adjust according to the demands at the particular time on the intelligence community, and for that I want to thank that gentleman, and I look forward to working with him on this issue.
Reclaiming my time, having served on the Intelligence Committee until this year for a number of years, I'm very much aware of the constraints that are sometimes placed on the agencies by lots of reports due on lots of dates. I look forward to working with the chairman and the ranking member to see that we get this estimate done in the most constructive way. With that, I ask unanimous consent to withdraw the amendment pending.
Without objection, the amendment is withdrawn.
Thank you.
It is now in order to consider amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report 112-200. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Hunter of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 392, the gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is pretty simple. It requests that the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense, 120 days after the passage of this bill, submit a plan and execute the plan to develop a coordinated strategy between our intelligence communities and our Department of Defense to go after IED manufacturers and IED transporters between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The majority of IEDs in Afghanistan come from Pakistan. We know where a lot of those IED manufacturers are, but our DOD is not able to execute the strategy of going after those IED manufacturers and the people that transport them across the border on their own. They need the intelligence community and the 16 agencies which make up that community to be on their side. More than 80% of the improvised explosive devices used against our U.S. troops in Afghanistan have homemade explosives as the main charge and are almost exclusively derived from calcium ammonium nitrate fertilizer produced in Pakistan. Homemade explosives are also called HME. The vast majority of IED components, including commercial explosive radio control triggers and HME precursors, are sourced from and or transmitted through Pakistan. The continued uncontrolled availability of ammonium nitrate and other HME precursor material smuggled into Afghanistan from Pakistan is the most significant factor contributing to the Afghan IED problem. Over 70% of our casualties in Afghanistan come from these homemade IEDs. IEDs are also a problem in Pakistan and the Pakistani people. Since January of 2011, more than 500 people have been killed and over 14,000 people have been injured by IEDs in Pakistan. The Afghanistan IED threat cannot be defeated without addressing the networks and precursors in Pakistan. To defeat the Pakistan-produced HME-fueled IEDs in Afghanistan, the solution requires integrated efforts and leveraging of the combined authorities, policies, and capabilities many agencies of our government, coalition partners, and especially the intelligence community. We need to identify the key facilitators of raw material supplying the HME pipeline into Afghanistan, and we also need to identify specific financial networks and funding streams for these HME networks, as well as identify these key financiers. That's what my amendment does. It makes the intelligence community and the defense community get together, submit a plan, and execute that plan to work on the same page, because right now there's a severe gap between what the DOD considers #1 priority. Our defense guys over there, our soldiers and Marines on the ground, their #1 priority is different from the intelligence community's #1 priority. The intelligence community right now goes after high-value targets. They go after the bad guys wherever they may be found, but they need to work together on these IEDs coming over from Pakistan. It's the only way that we can defeat them. With that, Madam Chair, I would urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to accept my amendment.
And reserve your time.
I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time.
Thanks.
The gentleman from Maryland?
Yes.
Does the gentleman claim time in opposition?
Claim time in opposition. First, I want to
Gentleman's
acknowledge
recognized for 5 minutes.
claim, though I'm not opposed to the amendment. I just want to acknowledge your service. You have been on the field. I think IEDs are one of the biggest threats that we have to our men and women who are in Iraq, Afghanistan, or in theater, and I strongly support that we move forward with your amendment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to yield the balance of my time to Chairman Rogers.
The gentleman from Michigan?
I'd like to thank the gentleman from California. I think this is an important amendment. These are issues we have been working on in committee, and I can tell you we've been a tad bit frustrated at that lack of coordination. And I think it's unfortunate it took this amendment as a part of the intelligence bill, to continue to put pressure on the administration to get their act together on this particular issue. It is an issue we must and absolutely must solve, not only for the safety and security of the men and women who serve in our armed forces in Afghanistan, but also for the greater impact on the war on terror. And I would strongly urge the support of the Hunter Amendment.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to speak to the amendment? If not, the question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. And in the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from Michigan.
Madam Chair, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-200. For what purpose does the gentleman from Delaware seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
And the clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Carney of Delaware.
Pursuant to House Resolution 392, the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. Carney, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Delaware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I again rise to recognize the importance of rail security in the effort to assess, prepare for, and neutralize terrorist threats to our critical infrastructure. While roughly 1.7 million passengers ride in domestic and international air flights daily, every weekday 34 million Americans ride on trains and transit systems. We've seen the tragic consequences of attacks to rail and subway systems in Britain, Spain, and India. We know al-Qaeda was looking to target American rail systems this year. An attack on our rail system here in the United States would simply be devastating. Earlier this year, the House adopted an amendment I offered to the fiscal year 2011 Intelligence Authorization Act. There was broad bipartisan support for making rail security an intelligence priority. I continue to believe we must address the security vulnerabilities in our rail and transit systems. Our intelligence community does great work to coordinate with those who own and operate trains and rail lines. In particular, the Office of Intelligence and Analysis within the Department of Homeland Security develops a threat assessment for critical infrastructure. My amendment is a simple amendment. It affirms the importance of assessments and information sharing conducted by intelligence analysts. It expresses the sense of Congress that the intelligence community must continue to prioritize rail security in identifying and preventing terrorist threats. As a near-daily rider of Amtrak myself, I want to know that the United States government is doing all it can to keep my fellow passengers and rail passengers across the country safe. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. Thank you for your consideration. I yield to the ranking member.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Michigan.
Claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized.
Yeah, and again, I appreciate the gentleman's concern for rails. It is an incredibly important issue. I continue to believe, and as I did the last go-round, this is just not the right place for this. I've agreed not to officially oppose his amendment. I just want to, again, remind individuals that this is 17 agencies across the whole spectrum of intelligence work. And for Congress to step in and say that rail priority, even if their agency might be satellite-oriented, just does not make a lot of sense to me, and I know it won't make a lot of sense to them as well. I, again, agree that rail security is incredibly important. We have segments of the intelligence community, and I want to reemphasize segments, and here in our homeland security that worry about rail security. And I argue that would be a better place for this amendment. As I said, I will not officially oppose it. I have made no official recommendation. Again, I appreciate the gentleman's position. I'll be voting no, but I would tell the rest of the members to do what they see fit. And with that, I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Michigan yields back, and I think the gentleman from Delaware yield time to the gentleman from Maryland. Does the gentleman from Maryland wish to be recognized?
No. Okay.
Does the gentleman from Delaware yield back?
I'd just like to thank the chair. I appreciate his position on this. Thank him for not officially opposing it and ask for support from everyone in the chamber. Yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Delaware, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Vote.
Recorded vote is requested. And pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Delaware will be postponed. The chair understands that amendment number 8 will not be offered. It is now in order to consider amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report 112-200. For what purposes does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Madam Speaker.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Keating of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 392, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Ruppelsberger, for allowing me to present this timely amendment to the fiscal year 12 intelligence authorization. Madam Speaker, there are 72 fusion centers throughout the United States, including one in Massachusetts, which is also the home of the sole Joint Terrorism Task Force that's housed in an airport. However, as noted yesterday by Mr. Lee Hamilton, who is the Vice Chair of the 9/11 Commission, during the Committee on Homeland Security's hearing, which dealt with looking back 10 years after 9/11, all 72 fusion centers have varying degrees of quality, and this results in serious gaps in communication. Gaps in sharing, such as agencies' failure to link information about the individual who attempted the December 25, 2009 airline bombing, prevented him from being included into the federal government's terrorist watch list, a tool used by DHS to screen for persons who pose a significant security threat. This week, the GAO released a report to the Department of Homeland Security recommending that DHS improve its assistance and services to state and local Homeland Security partners and streamline some of the information sharing mechanisms. Furthermore, in July 2011, DHS reported that it had established performance measures for assessing its information sharing efforts, and these measures include, for example, the percent of intelligence reports customers rated as satisfactory, enabling customers to anticipate emergency threats. DHS plans to report on the metrics beginning in the fiscal year 2012. While these are really positive steps, GAO's work has shown that developing outcome-based performance measures that gauge information sharing efforts are really necessary to strengthen the accountability of these efforts, and we are still waiting for DHS to implement these steps. Now, as a district attorney, I understand from my own experience, a former district attorney of over a decade, how critical it is to share information and how not sharing that information indeed enhances and enables criminal activity. And that indeed carries over to terrorists themselves. This amendment encourages this type of streamlining process by further integrating and leveraging fusion centers to enlist all the intelligence, law enforcement, homeland security capabilities of the United States in a manner that's consistent with the Constitution to prevent acts of terrorism against the United States of America. It was just a few months ago that Secretary Napolitano, in testimony before the Homeland Security Committee, said that the threat of terrorism is at its most heightened state since 9/11. That's what she's saying now. So I encourage all members to vote for this amendment, as well as the manager's amendment to strengthen this bill and incorporate all the elements of the intelligence community, particularly trying to merge information, enhance sharing of information with state and local officials who have their ear to the ground. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from Michigan, do you claim time in opposition?
I do, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
And again, I appreciate the gentleman's interest here. I don't know any organization that we established not to operate under the rules and construct of the Constitution of the United States. It is a little bit redundant in my perspective. And also, we deal with these issues through IGs. We do this through congressional oversight. And we deal with this in the classified annex, and I would encourage the gentleman to take a look at the classified annex. A lot of the work that we do is to make sure that these organizations are functioning according to rules, regulation, and constitutional law. I am not going to oppose his amendment. I have no recommendation. I do think, however, it's probably not well placed in this particular piece of legislation. And with that, I would yield back the remainder of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker.
Does the gentleman from Maryland?
Yes, I reserve as much time as I may consume. First, the amendment, this amendment would...
Does the gentleman from Massachusetts reclaim his time by unanimous consent?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I do reclaim.
Without objection, the gentleman from Maryland.
I reserve as much time as I may consume. First, I support this amendment. The amendment would include a sense of Congress language to encourage the Director of National Intelligence and Secretary of Homeland Security to integrate the intelligence sharing capabilities of fusion centers and leverage participation from all intelligence, law enforcement, and Homeland Security agencies to prevent acts of terrorism against the United States. I thank the gentleman for this amendment, which is very timely as we approach the 10th anniversary of September 11th. The Intelligence Committee is holding a series of open hearings in order to acknowledge the progress made in the intelligence and national security community since 9/11 and to identify areas that will need improvement. One area we will explore is federal collaboration with first responders at state and local levels. The Bipartisan Policy Center and the former co-chairman of 9/11 Commission, Hamilton, recently issued a report about our national response to 9/11 over the last 10 years. They found that federal-local information sharing still is not as good as it could be. The proposed sense of Congress is consistent with the findings of numerous organizations that our nation still requires better interagency integration of intelligence. I therefore urge a yes vote on the amendment and yield back on the amendment. Also, I acknowledge the fact that you were a former prosecutor. I was a former prosecutor. Our chairman was a former FBI agent. So I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman from Massachusetts yield back?
Yes. Yes, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker,
we don't need it.
You don't want an electronic vote?
No.
Thank you.
The amendment is agreed to. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, proceedings will now resume on those amendments printed in Part B of House Report 112-200 on which further proceedings were postponed, in the following order. Amendment number 6 by Mr. Hunter of California. Amendment number 7 by Mr. Carney of Delaware. And the chair will reduce to 2 minutes the time for any electronic vote after the first vote in this series. The unfinished business is a request for a recorded vote on Amendment number 6 printed in Part B of House Report 112-200 by the gentleman from California, Mr. Hunter, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the yeas prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Hunter of California.
A recorded vote has been requested, and those in support of the request for a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device, and this will be a 15-minute vote.
Following the President's joint session speech last night, the Senate to the House end this morning. The Senate's also in general speeches, but the House today will complete work on the Intelligence Authorization Bill for the next fiscal year. The rule for this bill was approved yesterday, and this should be the only legislative business today. This and a resolution of remembrance of September 11th. The 10th anniversary is this weekend. This is the first vote in a series of 6 votes. This is an amendment to the intelligence bill. 15-minute vote on the House floor. An amendment by Duncan Hunter of California, one of 3 amendments that will get votes on this intelligence authorization bill. We expect this to be a series of 5 votes. The last 2 will be the motion to recommit and final passage, and as the House wraps up its legislative week. The Senate is also in today. No legislation on their agenda, no roll call votes anyway in the Senate today, and you can follow speeches in the Senate this morning on C-SPAN 2. On C-SPAN 3, we are expecting this morning to, as a matter of fact, Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic leader, has just come up into the briefing room and speaking to reporters. That briefing is live now on C-SPAN 3. And we also will carry comments from President Obama. He is speaking this morning following his joint session speech last night. He is in Richmond, Virginia at the University of Richmond, and that's coming up this morning at 11:35. That will be live on C-SPAN 3 and also online at cspan.org. The House today is working on the intelligence authorization bill for the next fiscal year. 3 amendments getting votes here. The first one by Duncan Hunter of California. This is a 15-minute vote. The House back in today, the Senate as well, following the joint session speech last night by the President, laying out his jobs plan. We've linked to the White House's jobs plan fact sheet on our website at cspan.org. You can also watch last night's speech there. The President today will be out reiterating what he said last night. He's speaking at the University of Richmond this morning at 11:35. That will be live on C-SPAN 3 and also on cspan.org. This morning, Washington Journal caught up with the Deputy White House spokesman Josh Earnest for follow-up from last night's speech and a preview of what the President has in store today.
From the North Lawn of the White House is Josh Earnest, Deputy Press Secretary for the President. Mr. Earnest, we've been listening to our callers this morning. There's been basically 2 schools of thought, or 3 schools of thought from our viewers. Number 1, it's not going to have an impact. Number 2, more of the same. And number 3, we need to do something. What's your reaction to those various thoughts?
Sure, I think those reactions are entirely reasonable. I think the proof is in the pudding here. The President laid out a very clear bipartisan plan that should earn bipartisan support in the Congress. It's clear that I do think that what everybody would agree on is that the government needs to do more to support the private sector, to support our economy and try to create jobs and support the middle class. So this is a key part of it. So what the President did last night was he laid out a specific plan to try to offer tax benefits, tax cuts to small businesses so that they could hire more workers. He extended the payroll tax cut and broadened it so that more middle-class families would have more money in their pocket next year. And he laid out a specific plan to try and put more construction workers back to work, building and upgrading and modernizing the infrastructure of this country. So this is a multifaceted plan to put people back to work. But at the end of the day, this is an effort to support the private sector. The private sector is going to lead this recovery, but the government needs to act in bipartisan fashion. Elected officials in Washington, D.C. need to act in bipartisan fashion to get this done.
Mr. Earnest, a lot of the newspaper editorials this morning that were critical of the President's plan are asking, where's the money going to come from? That's also the kind of Facebook comments we've been getting this morning on our page.
Sure. Well, the President said that in a couple of weeks he's going to lay out a specific plan to the Super Committee. This is the bipartisan committee in Congress that's been charged with finding an additional $1.5 trillion in deficit reduction. The President's actually going to lay out a plan where they can go far beyond that mandate. They can go beyond $1.5 trillion in deficit reduction. The President thinks we need to get our deficit situation under control. And so by going beyond the $1.5 trillion deficit reduction, we can not only do more to address our debt and deficit problem in this country, we can also make sure that we pay for the American Jobs Act.
Josh Earnest is on the North Lawn of the White House, Principal Deputy Press Secretary to the President. Durham, North Carolina. Kurt on our Democrats line, you're on the air. Please go ahead.
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I think the President did a great job with setting up a plan last night with his speech. But we all know you have to be very blind to not see that that corporate America owns the jobs. And they're sitting on billions and billions of dollars of profit. And we know that the majority of the Republicans resent the fact that Mr. President Obama is in office. And they're going to do everything that they can to keep that unemployment at right around 9%. As they mentioned when President Obama was first elected. And that is what they have been keying on ever since.
Josh Earnest.
Yeah, Kirk, I appreciate your call. Here's what I would say. I mean, obviously, the government is going to put in place, it's the President's belief that in Washington, D.C., elected officials should put in place the kinds of policies that will support the private sector to get this economy moving. It doesn't mean we can dictate to the private sector what it is that they should do, but we can put in place the kinds of government policies that will give them an incentive to do the right thing. That's why we put in place a tax cut for small businesses, to give them an incentive to hire more workers. That's why the President basically threw his support behind a bipartisan plan to create an infrastructure bank, so that we can use a little bit of government seed money to leverage some significant private sector investment to modernize our infrastructure. What this will do is this will put a whole lot of construction workers right now that are out of work back to work building the infrastructure of this country. So this is all part of a multifaceted plan to put people back to work. Well, there's one other piece of this I think that's also important. The other part of the President's plan was actually to provide additional support to state and local officials, state and local governments, so that they're not in a position where they have to continue to lay off teachers and firefighters and police officers. Not only are those layoffs bad for those communities that has now fewer firefighters and fewer police officers and fewer teachers than they used to have, it's also bad for the economy. That's fewer middle-class families that are getting a solid paycheck every 2 weeks. So this is a multifaceted plan, but it's focused on individuals and putting individuals back to work to strengthen this economy.
Josh Earnest, Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell called it the kickoff for the President's re-election campaign. What's your response?
Well, a key part of the President's plan, of the President's speech last night, was his urging to both Democrats and Republicans to not wait till the next election. The next election's not for another 14 months. The President believes that it's time for Democrats and Republicans to put politics aside and actually act now. Only injecting politics into this very difficult economic situation only makes things worse. That was crystal clear from what happened over the course of the summer. So what the President did yesterday was, in the spirit of bipartisanship, he offered up some detailed bipartisan plans that deserve bipartisan support, and urged Congress to put aside politics, put the interests of the country first, and act now to pass the American Jobs Act.
What are we going to hear from the President today in Richmond? Well,
I think today will be the first opportunity for the President to travel outside of Washington, D.C., to talk to people, again, outside the Beltway, about what this plan means, and specifically about how this will actually put more teachers, firefighters and police officers back to work, about how it will benefit small businesses by offering them a tax cut to give them incentive to hire more workers and grow their business. What the President's very interested in doing is explaining and highlighting and underscoring to the American people how a policy like the one he laid out yesterday will affect the lives of individual Americans and communities all across the country.
Somerville, South Carolina. Mac on our Republican line. Please go ahead with your comment. Josh Earnest is joining us from the White House.
Good morning, Mac.
Mac, you with us? Josh, you don't get the chance to talk with another viewer this morning.
That's disappointing.
And a Republican viewer at that. But in light of that, let me read get your response to the first opening paragraph in the Wall Street Journal's editorial this morning. The latest jobs plan. If President Obama's economic policies have had a signature flaw, it is the conceit that by pulling this or that policy lever, by spending more on this program or cutting that tax for a year, Washington can manipulate the $15 trillion U.S. economy to grow. With his speech last night to Congress, the President is giving that strategy one more government try.
Well, I have two reactions to that. The first is the President was crystal clear about the fact that he believes that it's the private sector that is going to lead this recovery. And so that means that elected officials in Washington, D.C. have a choice. They can either pursue a partisan agenda that will have a detrimental effect on our economy and on people who are looking for a job, or government leaders can put politics aside, elected officials can do what they were elected to do, which is to put in place policies that will support the private sector and actually support the economic recovery, support small business, support big business, support workers, support unemployed people who are looking for work, support teachers, support construction workers who are eager to get back to work building the infrastructure of this country. So there's a pretty clear choice. The President is choosing the latter. He's choosing to put politics aside and to focus on bipartisan proposals that will support the economy. The second thing is is the President wasn't just laying out a series of one-off proposals. The President was laying out a part of the long-term strategy to put our economy on stronger footing. He said many times over the course of the last 2.5 years of his presidency that our country can't afford to continue to go through the boom and bust cycle. That is having a terrible effect on communities across the country, and particularly on workers who are subject to the whims of a volatile economy. What we need to do is we need to invest in the kinds of jobs and economy growing industries of the future. And the President spent a lot of time over the last 2.5 years making important investments in clean energy jobs. That's why this infrastructure is so important. The President referenced that, you know, the United States of America used to have the best airports and railways and highways in the world. But now when you go to China, you look and see that the countries in China and in Europe have these gleaming new airports. They have these new high-tech, high-speed trains. These are the kinds of things that we can do here in America. We have the construction workers to do it. We have the know-how and the will and the innovative spirit to do it. All we need to do is we need to put the proper conditions in place so we can make those kinds of advancements. That's what the President's strategy is all about. That's what he laid out yesterday. There's no reason this shouldn't get some strong bipartisan support.
Hey, Josh Earnest, before we let you go,
yeah.
There's been some reports about credible terrorist threats to the U.S., New York and Washington, D.C. Any comment?
Well, I can tell you that the President was briefed about this a couple of times yesterday. I can tell you that for the last 4 or 5 months, senior counterterrorism and homeland security officials here at the White House and throughout the Obama administration have been gathering for regular meetings to talk about the need to prepare to ensure that our homeland is secure in advance of the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Al-Qaeda has in the past articulated an interest in trying to capitalize on these kinds of dates. We know from some of the intel that was gathered at the bin Laden compound in Abbottabad that this is something that was of particular interest to bin Laden. So this is something that we remain vigilant about. We are obviously in close coordination with state and local officials to make sure that they are both informed and prepared for this. So this is something that I assure you and your viewers has the full attention of everybody inside the Obama administration who need to be paying attention to this.
Josh Earnest, Deputy Press Secretary to the President, thanks for joining us from the North Lawn of the White House.
Thank you, Peter.
Journal, a reminder, the President's speech at the University of Richmond will be live today on C-SPAN 3 and cspan.org at about 11:35 Eastern. The House right now is voting on the first of what we expect will be 3 amendment votes to the Intelligence Authorization Bill, an amendment here by Duncan Hunter of California, requiring coordination between the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense. This first vote, 15 minutes, and the other amendment votes will be 5-minute votes. The House today will also take up a resolution commemorating the 9/11 attacks. The 10th anniversary is this Sunday. The Senate is also in today, and they are in a period of general speeches, no legislative business expected in the U.S. Senate today. Yesterday, following the President's job speech, the Senate reconvened and they voted 45 to 52 on a motion to proceed to a resolution of disapproval of the pending $500 billion increase in the debt ceiling, which effectively kills that resolution in the U.S. Senate. The Senate is live on C-SPAN 2, the House obviously here on C-SPAN, and again the President's comments coming up at 11:35 on C-SPAN 3.
On this vote, the yeas are 397 and the nays are 0, and the amendment is adopted. The unfinished business is the request for a recorded vote on amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report 112-200 by the gentleman from Delaware, Mr. Carney, on which further proceedings were postponed and on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The clerk will redesignate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part B of House Report number 112-200, offered by Mr. Carney of Delaware.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in support of the request of a recorded vote will rise and be counted. A sufficient number having arisen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their vote by electronic device, and this will be a 2-minute vote. A 2-minute vote.
An amendment vote to the Intelligence Authorization Bill by John Carney of Delaware, dealing with transportation security. And again, the Intelligence Authorization Bill, the only legislative work on the House floor today. The White House has expressed a veto threat against the bill based on a number of provisions in the bill.
On this vote, the yeas are 303 and the nays are 92, and the amendment is adopted. The question is on the amendment in the nature of a substitute as amended. And those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Accordingly, under the rule, the committee rises.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Whole House on the State of the Union has had under consideration H.R. 1892 and pursuant to House Resolution 392. I report the bill back to the House and has been adopted in the Committee as a whole.
Intelligence timeout. So now. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration the bill H.R. 1892 and pursuant to House Resolution 392 reports the bill back to the House with an amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole. Under the rule, the previous question is ordered. Pursuant to Clause 1C of Rule 19, further consideration of H.R. 1892 is postponed.